Sitting in the New York airport, I couldn't help but think this was far from an ideal way to spend my evening. I watched as passengers boarded the plane, hoping it would be the flight that finally took me home to Charlotte. Along with my two sisters, I co-owned a small pharmaceutical business that our father had founded decades ago. Dad had come up with a range of niche but valuable pills that kept the company comfortably in the black, though it wasn't exactly a recipe for growth. With both of my parents gone, I had spent the last few days negotiating in New York to sell the company to a big pharmaceutical corporation. Today, the deal was finally hammered out. My team of lawyers and brokers made sure everything was in order, leaving the remaining paperwork to the attorneys. Now, I just wanted to get home, but it didn't look like that was happening tonight. The last flight to Charlotte was fully booked, and I was third in line on the standby list. I didn't even bother calling Laura, my wife, because I wasn't sure what I'd say to her. I sat at the bar, keeping one eye on the gate while I sipped on my second gin and tonic, thinking about the deal and the sizable payout, more than $10 million, that my sisters and I would split. Along with a cushy transition period with Big Pharma, it meant a major change in lifestyle for Laura and me. Our twin daughters were juniors at Duke, and tuition was bleeding me dry. But that was about to change once the sale went through. As I mulled things over, I noticed the boarding process wrapping up. A stroke of luck hit when the standby list updated, and my name jumped to the top. I tossed some cash on the bar, gave the bartender a thumbs up, grabbed my briefcase and duffel, and hurried to the gate. The agent handed me a boarding pass with a quick explanation. A group of 4 who checked in remotely hadn't shown up, so I, along with 2 others, was getting one of their seats. As I walked down the jet bridge, I realized my seat was in first class. It felt like a good omen. I made the flight. I'm headed home a day early, and maybe this is a sign the sale will go off without a hitch. Once the door closed and the plane taxied, I decided to treat myself to another drink, a gin and tonic, before drifting off, dreaming about a future where Laura and I would always fly first class. I woke up with a jolt as we landed. At the taxi stand, I considered calling Laura to pick me up, but it was too late, and I was too tired. A few days earlier, I'd driven my truck to the airport, but now I was too groggy, and a bit tipsy, to get behind the wheel. We lived a few miles outside Charlotte, so I nodded off in the cab. The driver had to wake me when we arrived. I paid the fare, tipping generously, and stepped out of the cab. That's when I saw it. A gold Mercedes parked right in front of my side of the garage. It was one of those flashy models, though, to me, all Mercedes looked expensive. The house was dark. It was past midnight, and I stood frozen for a minute, just staring at the car. I had spoken to Laura earlier in the day, around noon while I was at my lawyer's office, and she hadn't mentioned anything about company. Pushing aside the thoughts that started to creep in, I tried to imagine a simple explanation. Maybe she had fallen asleep, and I could just slip into bed beside her. But something wasn't right. Moving slowly, I made my way through the side passage to the house, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was silent as I moved through the kitchen and up the stairs to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, not what you'd expect if we had guests. I stepped into the room, and the door to my world closed. My mind went blank. My chest tightened, and I couldn't even feel my heart beating. There she was, Laura, naked, sprawled out on her side of the bed, one arm wrapped around another man. He lay next to her, asleep, a faint grin on his face. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My eyes fell to her hand resting on him, the two of them snoring softly. My heart shattered right there. Until tonight, her soft snores had been a comfort, a signal that she felt safe in our bed, in our life together. I had always found peace in that sound, but that was over now. That little noise I used to fall asleep to was gone forever. I would never hear it again. I would never share a bed with her again. Despite the gut-wrenching pain in my chest, my mind started to clear, and I noticed the guy's clothes neatly folded on the chair where I had sat 1,000 times before. My blood boiled. I thought about grabbing a tennis racket from the closet and smashing it across his smug, sleeping face. I considered waking Laura, confronting her right then and there. But what would that solve? It would only lead to a mess, and I wasn't ready for that, yet. Another idea started forming. I pulled out my phone and began snapping pictures. Every angle, every damning detail. When I was done, I quietly gathered up the guy's clothes and shoes. He was bigger than me, taller and heavier. Picking a fight with him right now would be a mistake, but I wasn't going to leave quietly. Not tonight. With the man's clothes in hand, I took one last look at Laura, my wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for over 20 years, the mother of our daughters. I felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, but forced myself to shove those feelings down. Whatever love had held us together for 2 decades was now gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Without shedding a tear, I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs, heading outside. The Mercedes key fob beeped as I unlocked the doors. I tossed my briefcase and duffel bag inside and slid into the driver's seat. I'd never been much for flashy cars, but as I maneuvered the Mercedes down the quiet streets, I had to admit, it was a smooth ride. After driving for about a mile, I pulled over to inspect the guy's wallet. Standard stuff, some cash, a few business cards that identified him as Ethan Morris, a senior sales manager at a local Mercedes dealership, and a driver's license with an address right in Charlotte. For a moment, I wondered if he had a family, a wife, maybe even kids. The thought crossed my mind that I could really ruin his life, cause all kinds of problems for him, and for Laura. But right then, I was too tired to think about that. I needed rest. So I headed to the nearest motel, where I could at least get a few hours of sleep before figuring out my next move. Meanwhile, Laura Fischer, ever the cautious one, woke up that morning with no idea her world was about to collapse. For the past 5 months, she'd been juggling this affair with Ethan, and somehow, I'd been clueless. In her mind, she always felt she was one step ahead of me, knowing I was smarter, but believing she could hide her little fling under the radar. As far as she knew, I was still in New York, which gave her the perfect cover to enjoy one more morning with Ethan. Lying in bed beside him, she let out a sigh. Sure, Ethan satisfied her, but not in the same way I did. Too much like the salesman he was, she thought, and deep down, she knew it was time to cut him loose. His growing clinginess was becoming a problem, especially after he insisted on staying over last night. It was crossing a line she hadn't expected. Even though she figured I had no clue what was going on, having another man in our bed, a bed we'd shared for years, was too much, even for her. She decided she'd end things later that day, after a quick shower. As she got dressed in the bedroom, Ethan stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel. He paused and looked around. "Laura, where'd my clothes go?" "What?" she replied, still half distracted as she finished pulling on her pants. "I didn't touch them. They were right here on this chair last night. Now they're gone. Did you move them?" She shook her head, starting to feel a little annoyed. "No, I didn't move anything. Are you sure you didn't take them to the guest room?" Ethan rushed down the hallway, checking the guest room, but came back empty-handed. "They're not there, Laura. They're nowhere." She sighed in frustration, trying to make sense of it. "Maybe you left them downstairs after we came in last night," she suggested, trying to dismiss the growing unease. "I'm sure I didn't, but I'll check." He quickly headed downstairs and returned moments later, looking rattled. "Laura, my car's gone too. Someone was here. They took my clothes, and they stole my car." His words hit her like a brick. Her mind raced as she tried to process what he was saying. How could his car be gone? They'd been home all night. "What the hell?" she muttered, sinking down onto the edge of the bed. "Laura, what's going on?" Ethan asked, his face pale. Could someone have broken in? Her throat tightened as a chilling thought crossed her mind. "Ethan, what if it was David? What if he came back from New York while we were asleep and took your stuff in your car?" Ethan's face drained of color. "Oh, God," he muttered, collapsing beside her. "We need to figure out where he is. If it was him, we're in deep trouble. But if he's still in New York, maybe someone did break in. Either way, I need my stuff and my car back. What the hell is happening?" Laura could barely think straight. "If it was David, we need to know for sure." She fumbled for her phone. "I'll call his office and see if he's still in New York." Ethan rubbed his face with his hands, muttering about how bad this could get if it was David. But if it wasn't, calling the police would be a whole different problem. His car wasn't even technically his. It was in his wife's name, for some tax reason. As he sat there spiraling, Laura dialed David's office number. David Fischer's office, answered his secretary, Lynn, bright and early. Hey Lynn, it's Laura. I know it's early, but have you heard from David? He didn't call me last night, and I'm trying to figure out where he is. Oh, hi Laura. The team worked late last night in New York, and they probably won't start until later today. I talked to David around 6 yesterday before I left. He said they were making progress and might finalize the deal today. Laura let out a slow breath. So, he's still in New York then? Yes, as far as I know. Should I have him call you when he checks in? That would be great, Lynn. Thanks so much. She hung up the phone and turned to Ethan, her face pale. David is still in New York, she said slowly. We need to call the police. Someone broke in and stole your car. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. Laura, what do we tell them? That your lover had his clothes stolen from your bedroom and his car taken from the driveway? This is a disaster. Okay, she said, trying to think quickly. How about this? We tell them it happened at your place. You were home, your wife was out taking the kids to school, and the car was stolen while you were inside. We'll leave out the part about the missing clothes. Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. Yeah, except I told my wife I was going to Atlanta for a meeting about the new S-Class and wouldn't be home until noon today. Laura sighed. Fine, then we wait. When noon rolls around, you can say you drove home early, left your keys in the car while you ran inside, and someone stole it. Your wallet was in the car, too. Ethan considered it for a moment. That could work. But in the meantime, he gave her a suggestive look. We could take another shower. Laura shot him a sharp look. Ethan, focus. Right, he muttered, realizing the seriousness of the situation. I'll call in sick. Laura, meanwhile, thought about her dull job as a paralegal at a small law firm, realizing her mundane life had just taken a dramatic and dangerous turn. Laura stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. When she returned, Ethan was already back in bed, looking far too comfortable. She briefly considered joining him, but then remembered her decision to end the affair. It was time to draw the line. Ethan, she said, standing by the door, making no move to undress. I think this is it. We've had our fun, but it's over. Last night could have been David. We're lucky it was just some random burglar. Ethan looked at her for a moment, as if considering arguing, but he knew she was right. They'd pushed their luck enough already. With a slight grin, he thought about the attractive mother who frequented the car dealership where he worked. Maybe it was time to move on. Yeah, okay. You're right, he admitted. It's been good, but we shouldn't keep tempting fate. He shifted under the covers and added, So, how about some clothes? Finding him something to wear turned out to be harder than expected. Ethan was a good 50 pounds heavier and several inches taller than David, making a proper fit nearly impossible. Eventually, Laura dug up a pair of old, worn-out sweatpants, securing them with a string to keep them from sliding down. She paired that with a faded sweatshirt, now a faint pink from a laundry mishap, which he had to cut up to make it fit his arms. Ethan caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, and though Laura resisted making a joke, his outfit looked like something a clown would wear. She just smiled faintly as they turned on the TV to kill time before heading to his place. Meanwhile, earlier that morning, I arrived at Ethan's house, the address on his driver's license leading me there. It was a modest, pleasant home with a small bicycle leaning against the garage. I sat in the Mercedes for a while, thinking things over, still numb and strangely calm. I hadn't cried. Maybe I was still in shock. After a long pause, I got out of the car, Ethan's wallet in hand, his license visible, and rang the doorbell. A young woman in her 20s answered, clearly not expecting visitors, and I could see the confusion on her face as she took in my rumpled suit. It was the same suit I'd bought just yesterday in New York, though now it looked worse for wear. Before I could say a word, she slammed the door in my face, only to reopen it moments later, phone in hand. I've got emergency services on speed dial, she said, her voice trembling. Tell me my husband's okay. Ma'am, I've got a picture on my phone of your husband and my wife. They were in bed together last night, both naked, both very much asleep. I don't think either of them's in any danger. But if you want to call the police, go ahead. I'll be waiting in the car. We locked eyes for a long moment. Slowly, the tension in her face melted, and she opened the door a little wider. She was about to say something when a child's voice called from the kitchen. "Mommy, wait here," she said quickly, turning to head inside. I heard her talking to the kid before she returned, this time holding a cup of coffee. "Hope you take it black. I've got to get the kids ready for school. You can wait here until I'm back, and then we'll talk." "Sure," I said, taking the cup from her. "Looks like we're in the same boat." She gave a tight nod and left, introducing me as Dad's friend to her children before heading out to drop them off. I sat there in her living room, sipping the coffee. It wasn't great, but I didn't care. I thought about calling my office, but I stayed put, waiting for her to return. When she came back, she rushed upstairs, then reappeared, looking more put together, hair brushed, a touch of lipstick on her lips. She walked over and extended her hand. "Sorry about the mess earlier. I'm Sophie Morris, Ethan's wife. Or at least I am for now, until we figure this out." I couldn't help but chuckle at the way she phrased it. "Yeah, that about sums it up. I'm David Fischer. My wife's Laura. Let me fill you in on what happened last night." As I explained the events of the previous evening, I could see her eyes welling up with tears. By the time I finished, she was crying openly. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, trying to sound more sure of it than I felt. "And these photos? They'll come in handy during the settlement. I can send them to you if you think they'll help." Sophie wiped her eyes and shook her head. "Please, keep them. I don't want those images in my phone, haunting me. If I ever need them, I'll let you know." "Fair enough," I agreed, tucking my phone back into my pocket. I doubt I'll be sticking around at my current job or in my house for much longer. Here's my lawyer's contact info. Reach out if you need anything, photos, legal help, whatever. "Thanks," she said softly. Then, after a pause, she added, "What do we do now? Are you going to return the car, or wait for Ethan to come home and deal with him?" I leaned back, thinking. Ethan's a big guy, from what I can tell. Maybe a bit out of shape, but still a bad idea to confront him directly. Supposedly he's been in Atlanta for a meeting about the new S-Class and won't be back until later today. I smiled. You know, I've never driven a Mercedes before. I kind of like it. Maybe I'll hang on to it until someone really demands it back. Sophie laughed, a lightness in her voice that surprised us both. "Honestly, the car's registered in my name. Ethan, let's just call him Idiot. Put it in my name for tax reasons. Something about better depreciation." We both laughed again, the tension breaking for a moment as we sat there, two people tangled in the same mess, trying to find some humor in the disaster. "Since it's in my name, I can give you permission to drive the car," Sophie said with a sly smile. "If you get pulled over, the cops can call me, and I'll clear it up." I nodded, appreciating the plan but sensing she had more to say. Sophie paused, then added, "One more thing. There've been a lot of break-ins around here lately. You've got Ethan's keys and clothes, but if the spare key we hide in the backyard is gone when he gets home, he might panic and try to break in. If the alarm is set to instant alert, he could have a lot of cops on his hands." I couldn't help but laugh. "Sophie, you're something else. I think I'm falling for you all over again." She smiled but quickly regained her serious tone. "Ethan can wait until later. I'll take the kids to the park after school and give him some extra time to dig his own grave. Just keep me updated, especially if the police get involved. And call me when you're ready to return the car. I don't want you getting into trouble." "Don't worry," I said, smiling as I slid into the gold Mercedes. As I drove off, I wondered how much this model would cost in a color I actually liked. Sophie handed me a permission note, and I figured she'd grab the hidden key. Set T. Meanwhile, Laura and Ethan pulled up to his house around noon. She practically shoved him out of the car, wanting to avoid any more awkwardness. Ethan approached the front door, hoping it might be unlocked. But of course it wasn't. He sighed, making his way to the backyard where they kept a spare key under a rock. When he lifted it, the key was gone. "Crap," he muttered, feeling his nerves spike. He glanced around, considering his next move. Breaking in seemed like the only option. He tried the back door. It was locked too. Desperate, Ethan eyed the family room window. It was large enough to climb through, and he figured it was his best bet. Grabbing a branch from a nearby tree, Ethan braced himself and smashed it through the window. The glass shattered with a loud crash, and almost immediately, the alarm blared. His bad luck worsened when a passing police car pulled up just as the window broke. Earlier that morning, Sophie had wisely called the police, reporting potential break-ins in the neighborhood. Now, Ethan's poor decision-making was about to catch up with him. Damn it, he muttered, scrambling to climb over the shattered glass and chairs he'd set up to avoid stepping on shards. But before he could get inside, he heard a voice from behind him. Police! Stop right there. Hands in the air, an officer shouted. Ethan froze, turning to see two officers with their guns drawn. He had no choice but to comply, stepping carefully off the chairs and raising his hands. Officers, I can explain. This is my house, he pleaded. One of the officers approached, hand on his holstered weapon. We'll sort it out, sir. Just back away from the house. Before he knew it, Ethan was handcuffed, his attempts to explain falling on deaf ears. His rights were read, and they asked if he wanted to make a statement. Yes, this is my house. I locked myself out, and I just needed to get inside to grab some clothes and call my office, Ethan stammered, trying to sound convincing. One of the officers looked him over, eyeing his absurdly mismatched outfit, a makeshift tracksuit that barely fit. ID, sir? The officer asked. Ethan's face flushed with embarrassment. I don't have it on me. I lost my ID, along with my car and clothes this morning. That's why I had to break in, he explained. How did you lose your car? The officer asked, clearly skeptical. Ethan hesitated. Well, I stayed at a friend's house last night, and when I went outside this morning, the car was gone. So it just disappeared? Did you report it missing? The officer pressed. Ethan stammered, trying to avoid revealing too much. He hadn't reported the car stolen because he didn't want anyone knowing where he'd been. But the idea of jail wasn't appealing either. You can call my wife, he suggested, desperate for a way out. She'll confirm who I am. The officer sighed, writing down Sophie's number and stepping away to make the call. Ethan strained to hear the conversation, catching bits and pieces. Ma'am, this is Officer Riles from the Charlotte Police Department. We're at your address. A man here claims to be your husband, but he broke into your house. Yes, ma'am. He says he lost his clothes and car. Okay, thank you. The officer returned, his expression hard. Sir, the lady says her husband is in Atlanta. Anyone breaking in here must be a burglar. She said she hopes we throw you in jail and toss away the key. Ethan's face drained of color. But, he stammered. But the officers were done listening. They hauled him to the patrol car, handcuffing him behind his back and stuffing him inside. Meanwhile, Laura arrived at her office, half a day late but ready to catch up. She couldn't stop thinking about David. Why hadn't she heard from him? She dialed his cell phone again, but still no answer. Frustrated, she called his office once more. Hello, Lynn, Laura said, her voice tinged with anxiety. It's Laura again. I'm starting to get a little worried. Have you heard anything from David? Lynn's voice remained calm. No updates yet, Laura. He's probably still in meetings. Laura sighed, forcing herself to stay calm. Okay, thanks. Just let me know if you hear anything. Of course, Lynn replied. I'll keep you posted. Laura hung up, feeling a knot form in her chest. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. He's probably still in New York with the lawyers, but it is unusual for him not to call. Since you're worried, I'll check on him and get back to you, Lynn reassured Laura. Thank you, Lynn. You're the best, Laura replied, though her concern only deepened. A few minutes later, Lynn called back. Laura, I spoke with the secretary at the law office. David left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight to Charlotte. He said he'll call you later. Okay, thanks, Laura said, though a pit formed in her stomach. Meanwhile, David was driving the gold Mercedes to meet with a divorce lawyer recommended by Paul Harris, his longtime business lawyer. David trusted Paul's judgment and hoped the referral would be solid. Mr. Fischer, please have a seat. Miss Novak will be with you shortly, the secretary said. The office was comfortable, not too extravagant. Before he could dwell too much, a middle-aged woman with dyed red hair entered the room. Mr. Fischer, she asked, and David stood to greet her. I'm Emily Novak. Paul spoke highly of you. Let's talk in my office. After accepting coffee, David began recounting his story, how he discovered his wife's affair, his desire for a divorce, and the need to protect his assets after selling the company. He left out the part about the stolen Mercedes, unsure how she'd react. "David, may I call you that?" she asked. David nodded. "Here's some good news," she continued. "Since you owned the company before your marriage, those shares and the proceeds are separate property. Your wife can't touch them, but you need to keep the funds separate from any joint accounts." "Understood," David replied. "But what about our house and other assets?" Emily sighed. "It's trickier. Given your income, you'll likely need to pay alimony. For the house, you and your wife need to decide. Either sell it and split the proceeds, or one of you buys out the other." David thought for a moment. "I don't want that house anymore after what I saw last night. Selling it seems like the best option." Emily nodded. "I'll draft the necessary paperwork. We can serve her tomorrow and propose a settlement next week." "That's fast," David said, still processing. "Less than 24 hours ago, I was excited to tell my wife about the company sale. Now I'm here. If there's any chance you want to slow down or reconcile, you can let me know," Emily offered. "No," David replied. "This is the path forward." Emily nodded. "If you change your mind, just call me. Otherwise, we'll move ahead." David thanked her, paid the fee, and left the office. As he walked back to the Mercedes, he thought about the man from the night before, but he had other matters to deal with. He had promised to call Laura back, and he needed to keep that promise. Laura was sitting at her desk when her phone rang. "David, where are you?" "I've been trying to reach you," she said, her voice laced with anxiety. "I'm in Charlotte," David replied calmly. "When did you get back?" Laura asked, her stomach sinking. "Last night," David said simply. Laura's heart dropped. She leaned back in her chair, trying to catch her breath. "David, I think I should hang up." "No, Laura. Please," David replied. "Can we meet? Just for a few minutes." She hesitated. David had been the most important person in her life for over 2 decades. "Okay," she whispered. "Where?" "Center Cafe, at 6, David suggested. The cafe held sentimental value. It was where they had first met and spent many important moments together. "All right," Laura agreed, though the weight of it crushed her. "David, I'm sorry. I love you," she added softly, her voice breaking. David hung up without replying. He couldn't bring himself to say anything more. Tears filled Laura's eyes as she sat at her desk, realizing the consequences of her actions. She arrived at the cafe early, nerves on edge, and ordered a glass of wine. David hadn't arrived yet, so she sat alone, thinking about everything. Her mind drifted back to her younger years when she'd been involved with college football players who made her feel vulnerable and insecure. When David came into her life, he was everything she needed. Strong, kind, a good father, and a great provider. But now, sitting alone, waiting for him to arrive, she realized just how far she had fallen from the person she thought she'd become. That should have been enough for Laura, but on the flight back from the West Coast, everything changed. David had been on a business trip, pitching a new pharmaceutical product, and she had tagged along for the weekend. On the return flight, alone on an overnight trip, she found herself seated next to a burly man, the coach of a local NFL team. They chatted, drank too much, and she eventually drifted off, her head resting on his shoulder. When she woke up, his hand was under her skirt, between her legs. Now, thinking back on that night, she knew she should have pushed him away or screamed. But she hadn't. What bothered her most wasn't the violation. It was the lack of guilt she felt afterward. Instead, she only felt relief when David returned home a few days later, and she was able to recover, both physically and emotionally. The coach left town after one season, but not before introducing her to a player on the practice squad. He wasn't a star, but like the coach, he dominated in bed. When he was eventually transferred to another team, Laura felt a strange sense of gratitude. She tried to be faithful to David after that, wanting to put her affairs behind her. For a while, she believed she had succeeded, especially after their daughters left for college. She cherished that time, when she and David grew close again. But then David surprised her with a generous gift, a new luxury car, any model she wanted. Unfortunately, She decided to visit the local Mercedes dealership, where she met Ethan Morris. He didn't just sell her a car, he seduced her. She knew it was wrong, and it only made matters worse that Ethan wasn't even good in bed. Despite her past indiscretions, she still believed her marriage with David was strong. She loved him more than ever and wanted to be faithful. Letting Ethan into their bed was a mistake, one that haunted her even before David discovered the truth. Now, she dreaded the consequences. "Hello, Laura." David's voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing there. He looked older, more tired than he had just days ago. She knew it was her fault. "Hi, David. Thank you for coming. I don't even know where to begin to say how sorry I am. Can I ask you a few questions?" David said, sitting down. "David, please, no. If we have any chance of fixing this, answering questions will only make it worse," Laura pleaded. "Let's go away for a few days, somewhere where we can reconnect. Just you and me." "Laura, stop. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave right now." His tone was sharp, his eyes cold. The tension in her gut tightened like a snake coiling inside her, but she knew she had no choice. "Okay, David, ask me anything." "Do you know what time I got home last night?" David asked, surprising her with the question. "No, not exactly. It must have been late," she replied hesitantly, knowing where this was going. "And do you know what I found when I went upstairs to our bedroom? Or what used to be our bedroom?" His voice was heavy with bitterness. "Yes, David. I know what you saw. I know it must have been one of the worst things you've ever experienced. I'm so sorry. I take full responsibility for everything. I won't fight you if you want a divorce." David cut her off. "Next question. How many men have there been since we got married?" Laura's first instinct was to lie, but she knew it was too risky. Their marriage was likely over anyway. "3, David. 3 men that I regret ever meeting." She could see the finality in his eyes. "I get it. Our marriage is over, and I deserve better than this. But if there's any way I can fix things, David, I'll do anything. Just say the word." David shook his head. "Call the lawyer, Laura. Tomorrow you'll be served with divorce papers." He stood up and walked away, leaving her stunned and motionless. As the reality sank in, the pain in her gut twisted deeper, and tears finally came. She buried her face in her hands, knowing she had destroyed everything. David walked out of the cafe, thinking about how he and Laura had first met there all those years ago. He wondered if this would be their last conversation, the last time they would ever try to salvage something between them. Bitterness welled up inside him. Closeness, once a comfort, had become a curse. Hearing her admit to having been with other men, and then seeing her in their bed with Ethan, snoring like nothing was wrong, that was something he could never unsee. Maybe, just maybe, he could have forgiven the 3 faceless men with time, counseling, and some serious effort on her part, but not what he had seen in their own bed. Their marriage was dead. He got back into the gold Mercedes and sat there for a while, finally letting himself cry. As darkness settled in, he wiped his face and blew his nose. He thought back to something Sophie Morris had said earlier that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago now. She had told him not to send her the pictures of her husband's infidelity, saying it would be harder to forgive if she had to see it with her own eyes. David understood that now. He decided to call Sophie, to share his thoughts and check in on what to do about the car. He dialed her number. "Hello?" Sophie answered. "Sophie, it's David Fischer. Just checking in, seeing how you're doing, and wondering what I should do with the Mercedes." "David, thanks for calling," Sophie answered. "I'm managing. You can keep the car for now. Ethan's in so much trouble, he won't need it for a while." "Trouble? I hope you didn't shoot him." "No, but he might have preferred that. He got arrested trying to break into our house, and he swung at one of the cops. He's a big guy, so they shot him with a stun gun. Then something happened while he was in jail. He doesn't want to talk about it, but I think another inmate attacked him. I refused to speak to him, so he had to call his brother for bail. Now his whole family knows what happened." "Wow, Sophie. I can't say I feel sorry for him, but I do feel bad for you." "I'm trying to work through it," she said with a sigh. "You were right about the pictures. Not seeing them makes it easier to at least try." Ethan came home crying, apologizing, and begging to stay. We have 2 little kids, so I'm giving him a chance. But life's not going to be easy for him. His own brother, a lawyer, told me to get a prenup, and I'll be managing the finances from now on. Ethan's on a short leash, and I'm holding the collar. Stay strong, Sophie. I really wish you all the best. When you're ready to return the car, just let me know. After hanging up, David sat quietly, feeling a twinge of envy. Maybe Ethan had learned his lesson. Being arrested, charged with assaulting a cop, and whatever had happened in jail could have scared him straight. David hoped so, for Sophie and their kids. David then drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more thing to do before trying to sleep. Call his daughters, Sarah and Lily. "Hi, Daddy," came Sarah's voice when she answered. The twins weren't identical, but their voices were so similar. It was sometimes hard to tell them apart. "Sarah?" "You guessed right," David said, a bit of warmth in his voice. "What's up, Dad?" "Listen, tomorrow's Saturday. How about we do brunch, just the 3 of us? 11 o'clock at that bistro on 4th Street. "Sure, hold on. I'll check with Lily." David heard some muffled voices before Sarah came back. "We're good with it, Dad. One thing, just the 3 of us, okay? No extra guests this time." "Of course, Dad," Sarah said, knowing he was referring to the last brunch where several of their friends had tagged along. "Thanks, Sarah. See you both at 11. Love you. And tell your sister I love her too," David said, hanging up before she could ask any more questions. He hoped she wouldn't call Laura, but he knew there was nothing he could do to stop her. Tomorrow morning would come soon enough. Meanwhile, after David had left the cafe, Laura's tears became uncontrollable. She knew she had destroyed everything. Her marriage, her family, her entire life. Soon enough, everyone would know. Her daughters would find out, her parents, her friends, and she would lose David. The thought of him seeing her in bed with Ethan, with someone who didn't even mean anything to her, crushed her. The shame was unbearable. Eventually, a waitress approached and gently asked if she needed to go to the ladies' room. Laura managed to choke out, "No, thank you." She paid the bill and left, heading back to the house she knew would no longer be hers. When she got home, she found some gin and drank just enough to dull the edges, but not enough to knock her out. It didn't help her think of a way to get David back. After finishing the bottle, she passed out, hoping for a miracle to bring him home. The next morning, David sat at the bistro, waiting for his daughters to arrive. He had reviewed and approved the draft of the divorce petition early that morning, then drove the 2 hours to meet Sarah and Lily. His mind raced, trying to figure out how to break the news. They arrived right on time, and things started normally enough. Hugs, kisses, small talk about school and life. They ordered brunch, and the conversation flowed easily. But after their plates were cleared, the real discussion began. "Dad, we know something's wrong," Lily said, her tone serious. "You look tired. You're not sick, are you? And where's Mom?" David took a deep breath. "Girls, I have some bad news, but no, it's not about my health. It's about your mom." Sarah jumped in, her voice filled with nervous laughter. "Oh my God, did she run off with some lawyer from her firm? Some young, hot guy that Lily or I should be chasing?" They both laughed for a moment, but when they saw their father's face, their laughter faded. "No, no, not Mom," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. David sighed. "Yes, girls, your mother cheated on me. But that doesn't mean she cheated on you." Lily, already crying, said, "Dad, if her cheating is breaking up our family, then yes, she cheated on us too." Both girls broke down into tears, and David couldn't hold back any longer. He cried with them. They stood up, hugging their dad and each other as if trying to hold themselves together. "Dad, let's get out of here," Sarah suggested gently. "There's a park nearby. We'll have more privacy." Noticing people starting to stare, David quickly paid the bill, and they walked to the park, with a daughter on each side of him, all holding on to one another. When they found a quiet bench, they sat down, still clinging to each other. Sarah broke the silence first. "Tell us, Dad. We deserve to know how bad it is." Lily nodded, her eyes still red from crying. "We can handle it. We're adults now." David sighed, gathering his thoughts. "You're right. You're both grown up, so you deserve the truth. Your mom cheated on me, on all of us. I found her in our bed with another man. Later, she admitted there had been others before him. The girls fell silent, tears brimming again as they processed his words. I've already talked to a divorce lawyer, and your mom is getting served with papers today, David added, trying to steady his voice. But no matter what happens between us, I want you both to focus on yourselves, on school and your futures. He paused, watching them for a reaction. There's enough money to cover your senior year at Duke, and if you want to go to grad school, I'll help with that too. But I have one condition. Both girls looked up, curious despite their sadness. I expect you to work hard and get good grades. Yes, this is tough, but you said you're adults, right? And real adults can handle adversity. Lily, wiping her tears, gave a small smile. Yes, Daddy. We'll keep our focus. We won't let you down. Sarah, quieter, nodded too. We'll be okay. But what about you? What are you going to do? David smiled faintly. I've been thinking a lot about that. On the drive here, I had time to figure things out. I realized that for my entire life, I've been taking care of everyone else. First my grandparents, then your aunts, your mom, and of course, you too. Now, with the company sold, I'm not responsible for my sisters. Your mom is out of my life. You're both adults, and soon you'll be off starting your own lives. He paused, looking at them both before continuing. So, I've decided it's time to take care of myself. From now on, I'm focusing on me. Lily blinked, surprised. You mean that? I do, David said. I could sit around and feel sorry for myself, but that's not who I am. I'm going to make the most of this. Sarah, still skeptical, frowned slightly. But what does focusing on yourself mean? Are you going to get a new job? Move somewhere? David laughed softly. No, nothing like that. I don't have all the details yet, but I do know this. I'm going to live a physical life. I'll run marathons, climb mountains, maybe even swim across the Atlantic. I'll travel, go on adventures, do all the things I never had time for. Lily's eyes widened. Wow, Dad, that sounds incredible. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Did you really come up with all this while driving here? Partly, David admitted. And I didn't get much sleep last night. My head's been spinning. But I'm serious. This is a new chapter for me. I'm not going to let this divorce define my life. I'm going to make the best of it. The girls smiled, hugging him again. We love you, Daddy, Lily whispered. We're proud of you. I love you both, David said softly, feeling a strange sense of peace. After a few more moments together, they parted ways. David drove back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes, feeling lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. As soon as David left, the girls exchanged glances and immediately called their mother. Lily put the phone on speaker. Hello? Laura's voice sounded strained. Mom, it's Lily and Sarah, Lily began. We just had brunch with Dad, and he told us everything. There was a long pause on the other end. What did he say? Laura finally asked. He told us you two are getting a divorce because of what you did, Sarah said, not sugarcoating it. Because you cheated on him. Another silence followed. Oh, girls, it's complicated, Laura replied, her voice cracking. Yes, I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But your father and I have been married for so long. We can get through this. He just needs time to cool off. Mom, Lily interrupted. Dad isn't talking about cooling off or fixing things. He's already met with a divorce lawyer. He told us there's no going back. Laura's voice trembled. Yes, he mentioned divorce, but I'm sure we can work it out. I've told him I'd do anything to fix this. Mom, I think you're in denial, Sarah cut in. Dad told us it's over. You need to accept that. Laura's breathing became labored on the other end, a soft gasp of disbelief escaping her. She seemed to be struggling to hold herself together, but the weight of her situation was finally sinking in. Lily and Sarah exchanged worried glances, wondering if they should have gone to Charlotte instead. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I know I screwed up and ruined my marriage. I think your father hates me. And he's right. I've done awful things. He told me to hire a lawyer, and I should have listened. I'm sorry, girls. I know this is terrible for you too. Mom, don't worry about us, Lily replied softly. We'll be fine. Dad's doing everything he can, and you need to take care of yourself now. Hiring a lawyer is a good idea. Sarah and I can come to Charlotte if you need us. Thank you, girls. That's kind of you, Laura said. I'll be okay. I just need time to come to terms with what I've done. They hung up, both feeling unsure of their next steps. Lily sighed. It's funny, though it's not really funny. We're more worried about Mom, who caused all of this, than we are about Dad. They talked a little more, eventually deciding not to go home, leaving their parents to deal with the situation themselves. Meanwhile, Laura sat in her Charlotte home, feeling the hangover from the gin she drunk the night before and sinking deeper into depression. After talking to her daughters, she knew she had to get up, get dressed, and leave the house. Do something, she muttered to herself. Just as she considered buying more gin, the doorbell rang. Laura opened the door to find a young woman standing there, chewing gum. Can I help you? Laura asked. Yes, ma'am. Are you Laura Fischer, David Fischer's wife? Why, yes. That's me, Laura replied. Why do you ask? Ma'am, you've been served, the woman said, handing her a folder and snapping a quick photo. What? What is this? Laura asked, but the woman was already walking back to her car. Laura sat at the kitchen table, her mind spinning as she opened the folder. The title of the first document hit her like a punch, Petition for Divorce. She remembered David's parting words, get a lawyer. Sitting there in the kitchen she had once enjoyed with David, she knew her happy days were over. Her betrayal had destroyed everything. Laura was right. She and David never reconciled. 6 years later, as she sat in the ballroom of a luxurious hotel, watching Sarah dance with her new husband, her mind drifted back to the past. When the girls were teenagers, life had felt overwhelming. So many activities, teenage angst, and boys who were either too mean or, in Laura's view, too nice. David was always busy with work, and her job as a lawyer had become mundane. It had all seemed too much at the time. But now, sitting at Sarah's wedding, she missed those days terribly. She was still at the same law firm, pushing papers, her life stagnant. Laura, here's your wine, said Greg, her date for the wedding. A kind, middle-aged lawyer with a paunch and a balding head. The bride looks just like her mother, he added with a warm smile. Thank you, Greg. You're sweet, she said, taking the glass. Greg was a decent man, and she could imagine marrying him if he were interested. But as she glanced across the room at David, she knew Greg would never be David. David had just returned from a mountaineering trip in Nepal, and Laura couldn't help but think he looked like a bronze statue of a Greek god, tanned, fit, even more handsome than she remembered. He was laughing with Lily and her boyfriend, holding hands with a stunning woman who matched his vitality and athleticism. Lily had mentioned that David had met her during a trip in South America, and they'd been traveling and climbing mountains together for months. The sight made Laura feel sick to her stomach. Laura, Greg said, interrupting her thoughts, I think we should leave. You've fulfilled your duties as mother of the bride, and staying here drooling over your ex-husband isn't doing you any good. It's not great for our relationship either. Laura winced but nodded. You're right, Greg. Let me say goodbye to my daughters, and we'll go. Laura kissed and hugged her daughters, wished Sarah and her new husband all the best, and tried her hardest to ignore David and his beautiful new girlfriend as she left the ballroom. David, watching from a distance, felt a brief pang of sadness for what they once had. Lily noticed her father's distraction and asked, Daddy, what's on your mind? David shook his head, focusing again. Sorry, Lily, what were you saying? Remember that strange gold Mercedes you were driving when we had brunch that day you came to visit us at Duke? What happened to that car? David chuckled softly. Ah, that old thing. That's a story I won't bore you with. I borrowed it from a friend, and eventually, I gave it back to her. I think she sold it. It was an unlucky car, honestly. Lily laughed. Yeah, it was a weird car. David smiled and turned to his friend, changing the subject. Now, tell me about our next trip. Are we still climbing the Alps this summer? Lily glanced at her father, noting how much he had changed since that difficult time. Despite everything, he had embraced life in a way she admired. She smiled as she listened to him plan his next adventure, grateful that, in the end, her father had found peace.